At the New Jersey SBDC Network, our mission is simple: to help businesses grow and succeed. Our consulting, training, and information services make it easier for businesses to reach their potential. Whether you're currently in operation or just starting out, we have the right tools, resources, and expertise to help you succeed. Visit us online to get started on your path to success today.
A pleasant good afternoon to everyone. My name is Takoa Bell. I am an event coordinator for the NJS BDC at Rutgers-Newark. And on behalf of Dr. Tendai Enduro, the regional director, I would like to welcome you all to our B2B private label supplying a store brand webinar. For those of you here that are unfamiliar with the SBDC, it stands for Small Business Development Centers. And here at the New Jersey Small Business Development Centers at Rutgers-Newark, we serve as the premier provider of business training and technical assistance services to establish small businesses, startups, and as well as to entrepreneurs. We are one of 12 centers in the NJSBDC network, and we service those in Essex County. Our center is hosted by the Rutgers Business School and funded through a partnership agreement between the Small Business Administration, Rutgers University, and the New Jersey Business Action Center. Our mission here is to help entrepreneurs as well as business owners start and grow sustainable, successful businesses through the delivery of one-on-one business consulting, training, and technical assistance programs. Now, these services are provided to you at no cost and are paid for by your tax dollars. If you or your business is located in Essex County, our website is www.rnsbdc.com, and that website is located on the bottom right-hand corner of my page. So on our website, there's a button labeled Request Counseling, and clicking on that button will lead you to fill out some information, including the help you are seeking with your business. And within 24 to 48 business hours, a consultant will reach out to you for an assessment. And for those of you here that are not in Essex County, our other website, which is our headquarters, is www.njsbdc.com. And on that website, you can type in your county and it will refer you to your local SBDC office. For the benefit of everyone attending today's webinar, we will be taking questions via the chat and the Q&A feature, but I also can unmute you and you can ask your questions via audio that way as well. So please feel free to ask your questions or post your questions, and we will do our best to respond during or at the end of the webinar. A copy of the presentation slides along with the video recording of this webinar will be emailed to you within 48 to 72 business hours so that you can refer to this information long after the end of this webinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our presenter for today's webinar, Ahmed Akdag. Ahmed is the CEO and owner of Styremont and is an SBDC consultant here at the NJSBDC at Rutgers-Newark in the areas of e-commerce, self-hosted and marketplaces, BC and B2B online strategic planning, and supply chain sourcing. And now, without further ado, I will turn today's webinar over to Ahmed.
Thank you, Takoa. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to pull up the presentation now. I will note that this presentation is going to be a high-level approach to B2B private label for store brands, primarily because this process is very contextual. It depends a lot on the type of product you have, the category you're going for, as well as each individual retailer's process. Every company more or less has its own priorities, its own style of doing the setup and the onboarding for store brands, different ways of reaching out to them and setting up with them. So this is going to present a very high-level perspective. It's not exclusively e-commerce, but because there are retailers who prefer e-commerce or who might be exclusively e-commerce, such as Amazon, those are going to be incorporated in as well. But what this presentation will have is the common denominators for all of these retailers. It'll go over some of the common things that they tend to look for, as well as common things that you should be factoring in when you are considering making the approach for a store brand. So first, we're going to hop in business to business, and this is going to define the context that I'm approaching this presentation from. So there are going to be business to business, B2B traditional, which is essentially, regular companies doing business with other companies. In this case, you would be doing business primarily offline and or with a brick and mortar location. This would refer to any kind of company who is looking for looking to work with somebody who's, you have a physical catalog, you reach out to them and they want to purchase in bulk and then have it uh, packaged or prepared with a private label in mind. A lot of retailers are still in this realm because they haven't all transitioned into e-commerce fully yet, or they prefer to have or they have an e-commerce, but they prefer to have the product in their stores. So that would make them a bit more of the traditional type. And then the e-commerce ones are companies that for B2B e-commerce, it's doing business as a supplier to a retailer or marketplace. In this case, examples are Amazon or Walmart. Walmart does have their stores, but they are generally preferring to work with e-commerce first because there's less overhead and less expense for them because they're not putting these products on their floor. However, they do sometimes have initiatives where they're looking specifically for products to put in their stores, not put on the website. But in these cases, these are what I would consider the e-commerce ones because what they're looking for is private label that they will be selling through their online marketplaces. And usually it will start off with they'll usually want the in the case of Walmart, for example, they'll want the distributor or the supplier to drop ship if possible. But they will also accept sometimes wholesale shipments to their warehouses or container imports, but that depends on the conversation being had. Like I said, it's very contextual. There's a lot of negotiation, a lot of communication, a lot of back and forth. So there isn't one way of doing this. It depends a lot on your approach, your products, the retailer you're working with, and their own priorities. So just to touch on the distinctions with private label here, private label I would use as referring to the general process of production or packaging of product under a brand or name of the retailer rather than the manufacturer, which essentially means that the manufacturer or the distributor or the wholesaler is not using their name. You are preparing a product that is packaged under another company's brand, essentially. The person who's purchasing it is under their brand. Now, store brands is technically under private label, so it is a type of private label, which refers to retailers who are you might know it as a generic brand too, but large retailers like Walgreens or Target, and I'll actually go over some examples of different brands, that different store brands that exist. It's not a comprehensive look. There's a lot of store brands out there, some of them more popular and more well known than others. So it depends a lot on the type of products, the retailer, but store brands is what we're actually going to be focusing on. And what we're going to be looking at is how these store brands generally get obtained, what the process is, and how these store brands, these retailers work with suppliers to or make the arrangements for this. Now, the process usually starts with an RFQ that gets shared with potential suppliers by the retailer. These RFQs will outline basically what they're looking for, what type of product. They're generally vague. Not they're vague or broad. They're not very specific unless the team is working on a specific type of product they want. But generally speaking, they are kind of throwing out some basic information, and they expect the supplier to be able to provide extra information, or for the supplier to provide their own interpretations. Speaking from a home goods end, in a home decor end, for example, what usually happens is they'll send an RFQ for a theme or a trend they're looking for. They'll outline some of the key colors they want. they might mention a type of design or type of style. It'll usually be something like a bohemian style or modern style. Um, Sometimes they'll give you a reference for what they're looking for, but that's not always guaranteed. And sometimes you actually have to ask them to provide that information. So the RFQs are pretty much just a brainstorm, and then suppliers are expected to provide, their interpretations or something that fits or the products that fit in there, in order for the team to review and see who they want to work with. To get onto an RFQ, there's different ways. A lot of for private label for store brands, you need to be very proactive. There is no one set way because every retailer more or less has its own process. Some retailers want you to actually be existing suppliers who have actually done business with them, because they consider store brands a major investment and they want to work with companies that's has a reliable track record with them. So some of them will require you to actually have signed up as a supplier and have done some business with them beforehand, and that won't automatically add you to their list for RFQs either. You will likely have to reach out to whoever the account manager, the partner manager, the buyer, whatever contact you have. If you're a supplier with them, and let them know that you are interested in supplying products for private label, so they can add you to their list. In other cases, they might do it automatically. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll actually go over a platform that a lot of suppliers now use, for finding. A lot of the retailers actually use, as well as suppliers, where the buyers use that platform to find suppliers who showcase their products on that platform. It's a third-party platform. It's run by another company, but they continue to increase the number of partners they have across different categories of buyers and different retailers. And unfortunately, some of these retailers actually exclusively require you to go through that platform. You can't just directly go through the retailer itself. They'll redirect you to that third party platform to showcase your products to push to their buyers. So we'll go over that towards the end. But essentially, the way the process works is you get that RFQ, and then what you prepare is something called a quote sheet in general. They might have different names for it, but the quote sheet is where you provide the product data and the design information. These can be renderings of the product. This is going to be the product data. Sometimes they'll have required data, and then sometimes they'll just want you to provide whatever is relevant. Depending on the category and type of product, these details can obviously change, but they are looking for technical information, because when you are doing store brands, you are usually working with a private label team or a marketing team or a buyer team who is more or less familiar with the category and familiar with the products. So you will be providing them with a bit more of the technical information, not just generic descriptors. They will want some of that specification information, a bit more details about the exact type of material being used, any of those specifics of the manufacturing process. They will want to know that, and they will generally ask for that. So you do want to provide them that additional technical information. I will note that when you are doing private label, and you are at this level, everything is considered confidential. In fact, that's why I also have a limited ability to share some information, because a lot of private label is the examples are all confidential information. So you can't really share that, but everything's confidential. So when you do share this information, you don't need to worry about it. And the buyers themselves maintain that confidentiality. They will never share information about other suppliers. They won't even mention who the other suppliers are, and you won't even know if there are other suppliers. There will be, but you never really know, even when you become a finalist, because that confidentiality is always going to be maintained. Now, after quote sheets, they send those in. What happens in the process is samples are generally requested. Now, if you're in a category where you are working with a private label team, there will have to be some kind of sample, that the team will want to look at or get out. Um, so when it comes to the samples, it'll depend on the type of the product. But you know, obviously, a large product that's a bit unwieldy, they're not going to demand you to send multiple samples of that until maybe it reaches the final and they've already confirmed that they are going to be doing business with you. At which point, providing them with samples is essentially an investment into the process, into the private label that they have more or less agreed to continue with you for. Um, so what happens is they get your quote sheets, and then they'll review your information, and I'll actually go through some of the bit more of the details of what they review and what kind of information they consider. But they'll look at the information, and then often product testing is a requirement. Um, so they usually will want some kind of testing, whether it's existing testing certifications you might have from whichever tests they want information for. Maybe it's flammability, maybe it's shipping, maybe it's the product itself has something they want to be tested. For example, for the home decor products, they wanted a Bureau Veritas testing for flammability, for odor, for durability of the product. So they had that kind of testing go through for it. The test requirements will be defined by the retailer itself. Each retailer will provide that information themselves for their process. Some of them, say use the default ones. They don't want anything extra. Others will work with that third party lab and have their own testing metrics. For example, using Walmart in this case, Walmart does have a testing rubric with Bureau Veritas for different categories. So when they want testing, the Bureau Veritas will test the products based on standards Walmart requires and Walmart expects and Walmart wants tested. So each of the retailers will define how they want the testing, or whether they'll accept existing reports, or whether they'll want the product specifically tested based on their needs and their insurance requirements, and whatever their executives have decided is something they want to consider in there. And then the next part is usually label creation. Um, this can vary a lot. It depends on whether their team creates the labels or whether they expect you to create it. So I will note that for the private label process, it is going to be a bit labor intensive. This isn't something you'll probably be able to do from the start unless you are a business that has gained some traction, gained some employees, increased your size, because there's a lot of resources and there's usually specific deadlines. So not only do you need to prepare everything, but everything has to be done by those deadlines. And these deadlines include making sure everything is ready for the product to be produced, as well as production to finish and the products to be in the hands of that retailer at the deadline they expect it to be. So it's a very intensive process. And there's a lot of steps in it. And once you're approved, that's when the actual work begins, I would say, because at that point, there's a lot of steps that need to be taken care of. And these steps include product testing, label creation. And then what will happen eventually is you will get a purchase order. And then they will give you specific deadlines for some of them will have where if you're using another manufacturer, maybe you're not manufacturing yourself, you might have need to make arrangements for let's say you're using manufacturer overseas. You'll have to make arrangements for getting the testing done with a lab there for the pre-shipment inspection. So that's something that some companies will require too. Pre-shipment inspection is essentially the products are created and labels applied, everything's ready, the item's good to go, it's about to get shipped. Before the date it gets picked up, the retailer will want you to use a lab to have a team sent who will inspect the items that have been prepared. And what they will check for is to make sure that there's no defects, there's no labels missing, that everything is prepared according to what the retailer expects. And then those items, once they get approval, then it'll be ready to ship. If you are a manufacturer yourself and you're located in the US, you'll essentially use a domestic lab to do that. And the process might be a bit easier because you'll be shipping locally, whereas overseas, you need to make sure that everything aligns time-wise, because you do not want to have any delays, especially with the shipping because of the pre-shipment inspection. And what they usually have is something called a minimum arrive by date. And that arrive by date refers to the retailer receiving those products. So some retailers will have a date, some will ask you to provide that date, and then that will be the deadline. Um, they usually like it the earlier the better. Some will have it based on if they're aiming for, let's say, a seasonal trend. For example, let's say they're looking to make a collection or products that they're pitching for the summer, for example. They will set a date for it to come at the start of summer or right before what they consider the start of summer in their calendar, and they will set the date. But if it's not something like that, then what they will be looking for is the earliest possible date that you can guarantee it, and they will use that as a deadline. And then once everything's done, the products have been shipped, you have successfully passed the initial steps and you have gotten the initial shipment to their stores. What remains is essentially a process of remaining in contact with that retailer. Often you will have to reach out to them unless there's an issue, at which point they will reach out to you. But you will usually have to reach out to them to see how things are going, see if there's anything more they need, see if there's any kind of contributions you can make to improve sales. So what will happen is that you'll be in constant communication for discussing resupply. They'll usually be sending out purchase orders. Most of them will have some kind of process for that. So that's a bit more of a technical, very standard process. Marketing will depend on the retailer and whatever agreement you signed with the private label. um, We'll touch on that in the next few slides. And then expanding the assortment is usually what your goal would be once you've gotten the initial down, because you are looking to continue growing your business with them. And whether that means under an existing store brand that you are now supplying, you can add more product, or if they'll be willing to invite you to supply another store brand. A lot of retailers have multiple store brands. Even if it's the same category, it might just be a different target audience. So what you are essentially going to be looking for in a business development end is either increasing your assortment or increasing the number of store brands under that retailer, or working with other retailers as well, though those are independent from your business with that existing retailer. But usually once you mention that you are doing private label with others, that also adds a bit to your reliability in that process. So here's an example of, as you can see, it says ASIN. So, this is an Amazon criteria list. This is an example of a rubric they prepared a few years ago. Then this is the kind of information they wanted for a home decor product. As you can see, they had all this. Not all of them are requirements. As you can see, some are saying if applicable, and others are depending on the context. So if you're only doing this for a store brand for products you're going to be selling in the US, you obviously wouldn't be providing certifications for Canada, Japan, etc. But this is just an example of the kind of information that Amazon was asking for a specific, not even a category, but an item type within a category. And you can see it's very detailed, and they want a lot of information, including item references. And this was the first step. This was just the that RFQ process. The quote sheet came after this, and that one had even more information. So as you can see, when I mentioned it's intensive, this is what I mean. There is a lot of information that has to be shared. There's a lot of processes and steps that have to be, make sure you meet them by the deadline or even earlier if possible. And you also need to discuss and negotiate certain informations. When they give their RFQ, they're not 100% set as that a requirement. If they say a specific type of cotton, for example, they might not be 100% requiring that. They will accept alternatives based on whatever benefit it gives them. So if it's not something that fits into what their expectations are, they won't consider it. But if you are able to say, if they want, let's say they want 100% cotton for something, hypothetically speaking, if you are able to provide them 90% cotton and that 10% is synthetic because it saves them a certain percent in the price. It makes the product cheaper for them, which means increases their profit margin, but it doesn't change the quality of the product. The visible quality. If the product feels the same, looks the same, is more or less the same durability, they will consider that because there's an advantage to them and a savings to them. But it's very, like I said, it's very contextual. It depends on what they're looking for. But in private label, communication back and forth will be happening constantly, and you are able to provide suggestions in this process. You do not have to be stuck with what they're looking for. You are able to provide suggestions and alternatives and substitutes, and then discuss that, introducing those and seeing what they say about it. Now, touching on a bit more of the details. So I went over the RFQ broadly and the details broadly. Here we're going to just look at each of the steps a bit more in depth. So for the process, I went over this quite a bit, but basically the basic information, and they're seeking design and quality wise. A quote sheet will then be provided where you provide additional information. Design. Now, this will apply to a lot, but not every category. Obviously, some categories don't necessarily have that design aspect. Maybe they're just looking for a new supplier who can provide a better price. Um, but when it is a specific category that they are looking for designs, and designs do factor into it, what they will have is design expectations made by their marketing team. So a team will be responsible on their end for coming up with these designs that they're looking for, and this will be based off of target audience and or seasonal annual trends. Do note that the team has come up with it, but if you have experience, if you're saying that I've been providing these products for years, or I've done the marketing and the research on my end, and we're seeing this trend is not exactly catching on, or we don't think this trend is actually going to be that. We think the trend is going to be this. Especially colors. If colors vary a bit year to year. So if you're saying, if you did your market research and you have the experience in it, then you can say, they're saying cyan is going to be this season's color trend, but your research shows it's turquoise, for example, something like that. You are able to give that feedback, and they might send that feedback back to their team, who will then review it, and if they agree with your assessment, they will get back to you and say, okay, provide us designs in that color or that trend. So your feedback is important. Your feedback has value, and you definitely should have feedback, because in the private label process, while the team is professionals who have expertise and experience with that category, they generally have an expectation and a perspective that the supplier is the actual expert, because these are products you are selling, these are products you have sourced, and these are products that they assume that you have a much higher knowledge of, because it's your business. So your feedback does hold weight. So you will want to share your feedback if you think it is going to improve the process and improve sales, if you get into that store brand process. In case, like I said, in case design isn't applicable to the type of products that they're looking at, the focus will actually will look at material and price. When it comes to material, that either means specific types of material, or that means material sourced from somewhere specific. As you might know, made in the US is a popular category that for products that some retailers look for, and they might be say specifically on that, and they might have difficulty finding people who made in the US products, because a lot of a lot of procurement happens with overseas factories, just on a cost basis and a process basis. But if you have a product that you are making in the US, you might actually have opportunities to partake in RFQs that are focusing on the material or the production being specifically made in the US. Um, that might be an opportunity. You can consider that like a niche that you might have an opportunity to grow into, because competition there tends to be a bit less than with all the other categories. And then price is basically, lowest cost wins as long as the quality is maintained. Obviously, they don't want someone cutting quality significantly to be able to offer them that price. They are having a expectation of quality, and what they're looking for is the lowest bidder on who can provide the best possible price for the quality they're looking for. And in that case, it just becomes a game of, are you able to actually provide the most competitive price? And if not, then the person who is will likely be the brand. Like I said, they do have a lot of other factors involved. So then it's not always a game of whoever's the cheapest, because they still want a certain quality, they still want certain reliability, and they want a certain confidence in that supplier. So it's not all about the lowest price, though the best price you can give them will obviously factor in and improve the odds of your product being selected. Um, so for the details here, when it comes to material, like I said, technical information is better. So you want to give them accurate information on the actual material. Um, you want to give them the specifics of the material. You don't have to get into too deep, like scientific levels of your product, unless it's maybe an industrial product or something used by certain fields that will expect that kind of information, and the retailer will let you know. But normally, for most categories, you don't have to get too scientific. Not to mention, when you do send the products in for testing, the labs will generally handle the science bit of it. Um, what you want to give is just technical. So you just want to make sure that you're not just saying cotton, or you're not just saying this type of fabric, or you're not saying this type of this type of steel or aluminum. You kind of explain the exact type, just so they have an idea of what you're using. Like I said, don't have to be scientific, but a bit more information about the technical specs will work, not in your favor per se, but it will help clarify your product to the team so they actually understand. Because sometimes they won't mention certain things when they're sending their RFQs or the quote sheets. But if you are a supplier who gives them that technical information that they look for, but they haven't specifically asked for, that will make them kind of lean towards you a bit, and also get a better understanding of your product. um, they, like I said, they will all have their expectations. It will depend on the information that's for the category or for the item type. And sometimes you might have to provide clarification if it's something they're just not familiar with, which can happen. If it's a team that has, if it's a private label initiative to start sourcing from somewhere else, or sourcing different type of products that they normally haven't, they will generally need some clarification, because it might be their first time getting involved in that. Considering how the retailers have been growing and expanding their assortment, this will happen less and less. But as new innovative manufacturing processes, new ways of using materials come up, you might actually have an advantage if you are able to provide them with some kind of, maybe you're using some new innovative way or new innovative material to provide them a product. You'll have to provide clarification, but that might work in your favor. And like I said, price is straightforward. It's a vital aspect. They will expect the best cost. Now, the best cost depends on the agreement you have with them, or what kind of shipping you want to arrange with them. Um, like I said, some of the e-commerce leaning retailers will look for you to start with drop ship first, where you will bring in a private label in products into your own warehouse, and then they will list those products on their marketplace or their website. And then as the sales happen, you will be shipping it out. You generally won't be paying for the shipping. They will take over, usually with private label agreements. Your liabilities and costs are minimal. The retailer should be taking on, providing the shipping and handling customer service, unless there's, in the negotiations and the contracts, things are different things to discuss. But generally speaking, they handle the shipping because it's private label. um, So if it's drop ship, you would be providing the costs there with your expenses baked in, because obviously you will have the warehousing expenses of bringing it into your warehouse and your warehouse team stocking it and pick pack and loading, unloading, loading. So you'll have warehouse expenses. That'll be a bit higher. And then alternatively, they might have a wholesale process where the distinction between direct import and wholesale is they might be looking at either less than truckload or truckload. In this case, they might want you to bring it into your warehouses. If you're doing it if you're supplying from overseas, wholesale might not be on the table, because of the shipping costs for doing that. It becomes more effective to do direct import. But if you are a local manufacturer or local distributor and you are doing the private label, wholesale might be an option because you'll have the products in your facility, and drop ship will be an option too. The only distinction would be with drop ship, what happens is that your shipment of those products depends on the orders from the customers on that marketplace, whereas wholesale is that the retailer will order in bulk, and they will pay you for that. And so for some it's more preferable, because with drop ship, you don't make money until it actually sells, like individual customers actually purchase that product. So it almost feels like consignment. But if you are doing wholesale, you are confident knowing that the retailer is going to be buying in quantity and making the payments in whatever payment terms. And direct import, this can change if you're local, but generally the gist of it for local would just be more tendency to do truckload orders rather than maybe less than truckload if they were doing wholesale but not full truckload orders. If you're doing it from overseas, it will be container loads. Um, to clarify here, you don't have to be a manufacturer to do private label. You can be a supplier who has a great relationship with a manufacturer, and you are able to work as that liaison and make the arrangements with your manufacturer to get them those products as private label. But manufacturers themselves can also do private label. So it's I am using those words, but note that it's not exclusive to either manufacturers or suppliers. Though if you are a supplier, you will want to make sure you have a good relationship with your manufacturer, because you will still be responsible for all these arrangements. So if you are giving them a deadline for shipment and the manufacturer is not able to meet it, the retailer won't see it as the manufacturer's problem. They'll see it as your problem, and you will be held responsible for meeting those deadlines. And if you fail to meet them, you will face the consequences, not the manufacturer, if you are a supplier. So you got to keep those in mind. But basically, direct import for local is truckloads, and wholesale might be less than truckload. Um, Whereas uh, direct import itself as a process will be for overseas. So they won't use direct import for domestic, but when they mention direct import and you have a supplier, you manufacturer overseas, what that will mean is container loads. And usually for container loads, they expect the best price you can give them, because uh, the it's pretty much them handling the shipping from the port of origin to their warehouse, and you are not really involved in the process except for the initial arrangements. So what they expect from you is the best possible price you can give them for that. But again, everything is depends on the contract and negotiations once you reach this point. Because once they approve your quote sheets, you will have that final discussion on the way that the agreement will work, and then you will sign up that agreement and then go from there. Um, Now, samples, as I touched on, samples generally tend to be something that they expect. If it's a small item or something that can be shipped without too much expense, and usually the retailer will have you paying the expense of the shipping for those samples, as well as the cost of making those samples. So on your end, they expect you to see it as an investment. Um, but samples will often be expected. Sometimes it'll be a process where they want early samples from which they will pick their final product, and then they will ask you if you make any revisions to the final product, then they will want final samples. And they will also sometimes want samples of the final product packaged. So they want to see the item finalized with their with their private label branding stuff on it, the barcodes, all the information in the box, or however the item's going to be shipped, and have that sent to them as a sample. One, to test the item in shipment, to make sure that there's no weakness in the boxes or anything like that. And two is they'll receive it and then they'll take a look at it and see if everything has been done. Now, pre-shipment inspection will technically do this as well, but pre-shipment inspection is something the lab checks, whichever lab you hire checks, and gives a report on. Whereas with this one, it's usually just an individual item that the private label team just wants to, assurances of, so they will make that arrangement. But like I said, some categories might have different requirements, different information. Sometimes instead of samples, they'll accept pictures if it's the type of product that you can't really send a sample because of size or expense, or if pictures are enough to convey the information of the product and give an idea of the product. Especially if touch feel stuff doesn't matter with that product, pictures will usually help, which means you save on that sample costs. But if it's a type of product that does need to be sampled somehow, um, and checked out and viewed by that private label team at the retailer, they will expect to have samples. And like I said, testing tends to be a requirement because they want a assurance of the product meeting both regulatory standards as well as their standards. Testing will be done by a third-party lab. Now, like I mentioned, some retailers or some categories might say, if you have existing certifications or if you have existing test results, maybe because you did it yourself or you did it for some other company, they might accept it. But some of them might specifically say, no, you have to send it to a third-party lab, and they will check it based on our standards. In which case, you will then have to, pay the costs for shipping and then getting it tested out. And they will have different expectations for the tests, and sometimes you might actually have two tiers of testing because there are some companies will have where it's like a pre-ship pre-inspection where they check certain aspects of the product, and then a second inspection, final inspection, where they check more detailed aspects of it. Both of the tests are destructive, and this is something that's not really testing related as much as it is the retailer standards. It's the retailer that wants this style of testing done, not the lab itself per se, because with the lab you could just have regular testing done. But if their standards are saying we need two tiers, two levels of testing, then you have to go according to that retailer's requirements. But one thing to especially note with testing, and if you have to make the investment yourself, it's recommended. You do not want to fail testing because one, if you fail testing, retesting will be required, and why you need to retest might vary, and this might even include revision to the product. And if you revise the product in any way, you essentially take a step back in the private label process. You will have to provide them that revision information, what you changed, and then you will also have to provide them new samples, and you might even need to provide them new pricing, unless they specifically say that they're not going to accept any higher pricing, in which case you might be stuck with a slightly lower profit margin as a result. So any product you offer that you're not 100% sure will pass testing, you can send these products in for testing yourself, and make sure that everything is a-okay before you actually start doing the private label testing requirement, because you do not want to fail. And another issue is failing tests can actually shut you out of that retailer's private label. It won't be permanent, but what they do is they'll essentially ban you for a few years from being able to participate in private label with them, because if you fail too many tests, and too many tests can essentially mean like two tests, or you fail a retest. So they're very stringent about this. So if any issue like that happens, it will affect your ability to do private label with them. So if you're not 100% sure that the product will pass whatever the testing standards are, you will need to make the investment yourself to have it tested independently, as in your own companies under your own company's results. You're going to be, the lab isn't going to share these results with the retailer. They're just going to share it with you, but you will be testing to make sure that if there is any issues, you can fix them yourself before you officially do testing, which will be reported to the retailer. So that's something to keep in mind because it's very vital. Like the entire process of private label, but testing itself is very vital. Um, Now, communication is a bit more of a soft topic. It's not really tied to the product itself, but in private label, reliability of the supplier and the supplier's responsiveness is important. So it's important to stay in frequent contact with the retailer team if you have participated in the private label process. You can reach out to them and ask updates. They might reach out to you and ask the status of whatever step you're on. If any changes or any issues come up, the earlier you let them know, the better. And if there might be any issues with deadlines, for example, you need to let them know significantly ahead of time as soon as you know that there's going to be an issue. But you want to stay in communication because if this is your initial private label process, this is your this is kind of your make it or not situation. Because if you are able to leave a good impression with your responsiveness, if you're able to get your initial products in because of the factors that discussed, this will increase your odds of continuing to do private label with the retailer, increase the assortment of products, and increase your chances of supplying other applicable store brands. So it's extremely important to maintain constant communication. And generally, what I recommend here is having somebody who is the main point of contact, who is specifically responsible for this project, essentially. So if you're doing a private label with a retailer, you should definitely have someone specifically responsible for handling it. And if you are doing multiple private labels with multiple retailers, you shouldn't have the same person handling all of them, because there's just a lot of information, a lot of deadlines, and a lot of communication that has to be maintained, and you don't want to risk, having a situation where somebody misses it because they're supposed to supervise multiple projects at once. Like I said, private label is very sensitive, and whatever absolute commitment you can give for the duration of the initial setup is going to work in your favor, because once you've got the setup going, then the amount of tasks will kind of diminish there. It'll become more of a maintenance role where you'll just be in communication for resupplies and marketing. But it'll slow things down, and then continue. But the specific project of the entire process of from RFQ to actually being approved and production to bringing it to their retailer's location, whether it's a store or a warehouse, that entire process needs 100% focus to ensure that you don't slip anywhere, because any mistake will potentially affect your ability to continue doing business as a private label supplier, as a store brand supplier. Now, marketing depends on the terms the retailer provides. Some retailers will handle all the marketing costs. They will handle all the sales. You won't be involved. They might accept some feedback from you, but they won't loop you into the marketing aspects. They'll handle it themselves. Uh, Others will invest a base amount, and then if you say, we think if you put in more marketing, the sales will increase, because you're trying to sell out the inventory so you can get a new order. What they might offer is an option to split, to do a co-op where you split the cost on any more additional marketing expenses. So let's say the retailer invests 10K a month for the marketing, and then you say, well, if you did 20K, we might get more sales. Or if they themselves bring it up, what might happen is they'll do 10K base they handle, and then they'll do a co-op with splitting the additional 10K investment, where they want you to provide the 5K, and then they put in 5K, so they're paying 15,000 a month, and you're giving them 5,000 a month. Like I said, this depends on the terms of the retailer. Some of them are exclusively them handling it and they don't get you involved. Others have a base amount and they will offer that split options. So it depends on the retailer, it depends on the terms that you agreed to. But this is how the marketing will generally works in store brand items. Now we get to the examples. I didn't put a lot of companies here because there's a lot of retailers and there's a lot of retail store brands. A lot of retailers have multiple store brands because they're providing different categories of products and different item types. So I started with Amazon. They're predominantly e-commerce focused, and these are a bunch of their store brands they sell. For example, Pinzon is fabric products, home goods products, home decor products. Ravina Home is also home decor products. It can be furniture as well. Rivet, same thing, and Stone and Beam as well. Amazon Basics, you've probably seen it yourselves. A lot of products. There's a lot of different categories of Amazon Basic products. So all of these store brands. In this case, Amazon's private label brands, are all Amazon projects or Amazon brands, and they have worked with suppliers to provide the material for these brands. Um, with Amazon, the outreach is harder to get on to start becoming their private label supplier. I won't go into details of how the process works with every company. Like I said, it's very different, but normally there are essentially 2 or 3 ways that you try to get into becoming a supplier for private label. One, in the case of Amazon, is they want you to be a supplier um, who on their vendor central. And getting to vendor central is invite only, so it requires you to generally have either sold significantly on seller central, or they happen to invite you because they see you're doing a lot of business on other e-commerce sites and they believe you'll be a good fit. um, and because it's invite only, there is no application. It's up to Amazon, so it's really hard. The only option you have other than becoming a supplier is something that tends to work for a lot of supplier outreach, is going to events. Uh, with the pandemic, I think the events still aren't really, they're virtual, so it's a bit harder. But when in-person events come back, um, trade shows, for example. That's what I mean by events. Um, and that the retailer that you are looking to become a private label supplier for, you're trying to make a pitch to become a private label supplier, or at least get on their RFQ notification list. You find them at a trade show, and if you are able to meet with them there and introduce your business and introduce some of your information, that will generally be an alternative way to get on their lists, because you are meeting them in person. And any other networking opportunity that lets you communicate with somebody at these companies to be able to get onto those lists, that is one way. But like I said, it's very proactive. The only other way with companies like Amazon, for example, is that they just want you to be a supplier who sells with them and then builds up a track record, and then becomes, in the case of Amazon, they have to invite you to Vendor Central. In the case of Walmart, you can become a supplier, and if you get a buyer, you'll be able to speak with them. It's a little quicker than Amazon's processes. But this is an example of their brands and how Amazon does its private labeling. Target. We'll touch on how you become a Target supplier towards the end of the presentation, which is where I'm going to touch into that third-party platform I mentioned. These are just some of their brands. There's a lot more, but these are some. Archer Farms is one thing that they've been marketing a lot in, but they have Market Pantry, All in Motion, Made by Design. As you can see, it's different categories and different types of products. Like I said, you can become a supplier, or if you can catch them at a trade show and become a supplier there who can also get on their RFQ list, because you are able to present your information and they're interested in it. That's always an option. And Walmart also has a lot of brands. The ones I give here are some of the more prominent ones that you'll see, but Walmart continues to roll out brands in different categories, and sometimes their one category will have multiple brands, because one thing that Walmart does is they kind of they work with they work with celebrities to create a line of products under that celebrity's name as a marketing aspect. So some of their private label would be on that basis. Like I said, to get onto Walmart's RFQ, you have to fill out their supplier application, and then once you get onboarded and you have the opportunity to speak with a buyer as a supplier, you can request that they add you an RFQ, or alternatively, if you can catch them in person, or perhaps from you find somebody you can network with, or you're able to make outreach with over LinkedIn, for example, any kind of proactive networking outreach. You can also try to go that route to see if they can get you onto that RFQ. But generally speaking, you do have to be onboarded as a supplier, because they want your information in the system. So some companies are like that, or even if you do the outreach with them, they will want you to create a supplier profile or supplier account or supplier application with them, so they can have you in their database, and then they can send you the RFQs as they come up, if you are able to get those invites set up. Now, this is a third-party platform I was mentioning. It's called RangeMe. Um, Now, RangeMe is basically an online platform where suppliers are able to showcase their brands and products to a variety of buyers from major retailers who are, looking for products to incorporate into their assortment. This isn't exclusively private label. This can just be, becoming a supplier and providing your brand products to them. But this is the way you reach out to those buyers from those retailers. You can create a free account, but unfortunately, to actually make good use of the platform, you want to become a paid account. So you do need to pay an annual fee to unlock the full access, because the free account limits your ability to submit your showcase to buyers. What they do is that they'll have certain buyers who have opened up for a certain period that you can submit to for free. But otherwise, if you are looking to submit to a specific retailer, you can't with a free account. You need to actually pay that annual fee and become a paid account to be able to directly submit to a buyer. And the reason I bring this third party up is because a lot of retailers have begun to make them RangeMe the exclusive place that they source their suppliers from. So they essentially, if you try to go to if you go to Target's supplier page, for example, on how to become a supplier, they will redirect you to RangeMe and tell you to create a showcase there, and then submit to their buyer from RangeMe, so they can take a look at your products. Um, Now, the free account, there is a thing where your showcase is viewable by buyers, but with the number of suppliers there, unless you're selling kind of niche product that the buyers might see your product for, or if you're providing like the best price there is, your showcase might get lost in the field of all the other suppliers providing similar products. So it's usually the paid account that actually lets you push your showcase in front of a buyer. And companies like Target, for example, do require you to basically do it that way. They don't have their own retailer-based application. They want you to go to this third party and then submit it to them from there. Now, I put a screenshot of a bit of their page. There's a link here to their supplier page, as well as a link to their list of retailers. That list might not be up to date. I know last year they added a few more retailers who partnered with them. So you'll have to kind of do the research there to figure out. Or if you create an account, a free account, you should be able to browse to see the type of retailers on there. There's a large variety. There's like the 99-cent dollar or more kind of companies. There's Walgreens and Target, for example, and then there's grocery stores here too. I think I saw Whole Foods on here as well. So there's a lot of different categories here, and they continue to grow. So if you're if the one option is you can individually look up retailers and then try and do the outreach with them, that one-on-one directly. Try to go to trade shows, do the outreach, try to become a supplier, find out how to become a supplier with them, and then try to get on their RFQ list. And then others will make you go to RangeMe, where then you can create your showcase and then push it. So this is one option that has it's kind of like a centralized platform for reaching out to a lot of suppliers. So this might be an easier option, but there is an upfront cost, and there is no guarantee that the buyer will respond to you. It's just that you can put your product information to showcase, and then you can make a showcase of multiple products, and then push these to the buyers and hope that they're interested in onboarding you. And in the case of some retailers, that's the only way you are going to become a supplier with them. And once you become a supplier, then you can open the conversation for doing RFQ. So basically, to do RFQ, you do have to become a supplier one way or another to get on their list. Um, there can be some exceptions if it is a certain type of product. If you are a manufacturer, for example, and especially if you're a manufacturer making products in the US, so you can put that made in US label, you might have opportunities to reach out because, made in US will provide that. Um, some company retailers will have diversity supplier processes, where if you are, woman owned, minority owned, veteran owned type of business, so if you have any of those certifications, they might be they might have an alternative process to make it easier for you to get in touch with them. Or if your business is that situation, then you'll be able to search up that retailer and find their supplier diversity page, and they will have a process there that's a bit more streamlined, because that is a priority for a lot of companies to bring in more diverse suppliers, um, who might be less advantage. So that is an option as well if it applies to you. Do look up a retailer's supplier diversity and see if they have a specific application for that, and then go through that process and try to get onto the RFQ list that way. So that is an alternative option. But in general, like I said, there's broad, there's high level. To do private label store brands, generally speaking, you do need to sign up with that retailer. You need to be proactive in your outreach. You need to try to get in touch with somebody, whether it's getting in touch because you created an application and you got in touch with a buyer, or if you use LinkedIn or some other network to get referral to be able to speak with them, to the going to trade shows, trade events, once they start picking up again, catching the retailer's team there and trying to pitch your product and your capabilities. And again, I'll mention, to do store brands, it isn't just having the product, it's having the capability, because the retailers don't want to waste time with manufacturers or suppliers that they're not certain will be able to meet the demands and don't have the capabilities. So you want to make sure that you do have those capabilities, and you can explain this to them, if you are interested in doing private label or store brands. So now we'll take a look at questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them. Like I said, very contextual, very dependent on type of category, very labor intensive, but once you get the process started, you're cemented in there, and you continue to have business development opportunities to this process, where you will be selling products under their labels, and they will be investing in the marketing aspect, so you just become a supplier or wholesaler, or even just if you're a manufacturer, you manufacture for them. And it's a very unique level of business development that you can achieve and maintain. Why am I not seeing chat here? So RFQ means request for quotes. Now, there's different kind of things. You've probably heard of RFPs and RFIs. RFIs are requests for information. RFPs are requests for proposals. Because they're looking for products, what they look for is they send out requests for quotes, because they're looking for quotes on the merchandise that you provide them. Some of them might call it an RFI because if they're just looking for information, but they're not looking to start sourcing yet, if you see any kind of RFI, that will be in that case. But generally speaking, because a lot of the research is done by the retailer's team, internal teams, or they hire a marketing team to do their research, RFIs don't tend to pop up a lot. They just go direct for RFQs. And RFPs, unless you're a service provider, that will be relevant. But since we're speaking about B2B private label for store brands, which are merchandise, RFQs will be the common terminology used, which is request for quotes.
If you have a question, please feel free to ask it. We do have about like 26 more minutes, so we can definitely take a few more questions. If you would like to take your questions or ask your questions via audio, I can also unmute you so you can do so. Okay, so since we don't have any more questions, it seems like, I want to thank you, Ahmet, for that informative presentation and for your time today. If anyone here that is located in Essex County is looking for a one-on-one counseling appointment with Ahmet, you can just click on the raise hand button on your screen and I will take note of your name and create that appointment for you. And yes, Tanisha, the video replay as well as the slides will be emailed to you within 48 to 72 business hours. So again, if you're interested in that one-on-one consultation with Ahmet, feel free to raise your hand and I will take note of your name. Okay, Tanisha. Okay, great. And again, I do strongly advise to take advantage of our consulting that is at no cost to you. Okay, Lola, great. Okay, great, thank you all. So at this time, I would like to direct you all to the chat. There, I will be posting some of our upcoming webinars, the link to our Eventbrite page, and the link to actually request counseling. And these webinars are only a handful of the ones that we're offering this year. We have about 150 different webinars in topics ranging from finances, marketing, e-commerce, credit counseling, cybersecurity, and so much more. So please feel free to visit our website or our Eventbrite page to find a webinar that fits your business needs. After this webinar is ended, in the browser, you will see a survey pop up. That survey will help us to adjust our presentation in the future, as well as give us some information on the kind of assistance you may be needing for your business. So again, if you have time to complete that, your feedback is much appreciated. At this time, I'm just going to share my screen so you have our contact information. If you find you have any more questions for Ahmet, or if you are looking to request counseling with one of our other consultants, feel free to visit our website, www.rnsbdc.com, or you can send us an email at rnsbdc@business.rutgers.edu, and we will go ahead and set up that appointment with you and a consultant. On that note, we will now end this webinar. I want to thank you again, Ahmet, for sharing your expertise, and thank you to our attendees for taking the time to participate today in the webinar. Again, if you have any more questions, feel free to send us an email or request counseling, and we can do our best to respond and refer you to the correct consultant. Thank you everyone once more, and we look forward to seeing you all at our future webinars. Have a great day.